Welcome to Philosophy with Valheim, where we embark on a journey through the world of Valheim while contemplating what it means to be a good person and other philosophical topics. This time I thought I'd talk about this thing in philosophy called the is-ought problem. This problem is attributed to David Hume, who remarked that in a lot of moral arguments he would often see people making an argument about what ought to be the case, but justifying themselves by talking only about what is the case, without making any particular argument about where the ought entered into the picture. He then points out that because, as we can all acknowledge, statements about what is the case are clearly different from what ought to be the case, we cannot try to justify claims of ought without showing where the oughtness enters into the equation. If you take this one step further, you are likely to start to think that if we need to explain where the ought comes in, then claims about what is the case cannot justify claims about what ought to be on their own. Now I get that might sound a bit confusing, so I'll say it in different words to be clear. This problem is also called the fact-value distinction, and I think these terms will make it easier to understand. Basically, Hume was pointing out that in order to make a claim about value, so what's good and bad, moral or immoral, we cannot justify ourselves by talking solely about facts, which are what's true or false, real or unreal. Now you might disagree with this. Indeed, there are many different views that reject the idea that facts and values are separated in this way. The oldest I've ever been able to find is called divine command theory. Divine command theory states that things are good or bad based on whether God, or the gods, command or approve of things or actions. The original idea of this is found in Plato's dialogue Euthyphro, which shows that the ancient Greeks often believed that what is holy purely by being loved by the gods. But the form you'll find today is the Christian rendition, which claims that morality and general ethical goodness and badness is defined by God's commands, namely, his commands to do or not do certain actions. The problem with this idea, or at least with the main interpretation of it that I hear argued for, is of course that no one explains fully why God's commands, or the love of the gods, makes any difference to what's good or bad. In fact, in the Euthyphro dialogue I just mentioned, the philosopher Socrates sort of alludes to the issue by asking, is the pious loved by the gods because it is pious, or is it pious because it is loved by the gods? Whereby pious he means holy, sacred, or transcendently good. What's good or holy seems to be something other than what is commanded, and so we have an issue in defining one with the other. Another argument involving an appeal to the divine would be what you can call teleological arguments for morality. Teleological arguments may claim that each thing and person has a telos or purpose, something for which it exists or was made, usually ultimately by God, of course. For instance, a pair of scissors is made for cutting, and it is said that this telos is inherent to scissors in some way, because a pair of scissors that cannot cut would be called a bad pair of scissors, and one that is effective at cutting would be said to cut well, or be called a good pair of scissors. This view says that human beings are the same. We have a telos, or more than one, and our effectiveness in fulfilling this telos, or multiple tele, determines whether we are a good or bad person. In light of this, brute facts supposedly reveal values and morals. For instance, we could say that killing is wrong because our telos is to be part of a social group, and murder is antisocial. And additionally, therefore, any facts about what kills other people instantly tells us what is morally wrong to do. This argument fails for a different reason than the last. It's not so much that it fails to tell us why we should care what our purpose is. After all, saying some action is our purpose sort of just necessarily entails that it's good to perform, by definition. Instead, it simply fails to account for that purpose. In other words, it's all well and good to say that we have a purpose and that it makes facts naturally indicate morality, but in doing so, you haven't actually explained how we determine what our purpose is, or why something would ever be our purpose, or even how or why we have purposes at all. Additionally, it ends up adding something separate from the facts. It's not that the facts are actually providing justification for morals, because it's the purpose, something separate from the facts, that is giving us the morality and imbuing the facts with value. Oddly, two other similar arguments with similar problems are made by atheists, namely naturalists. The first makes an appeal to evolution. Unlike the previous, it posits that humanity has a telos, but gives a more materialist account by claiming that that telos is reproduction as guided by natural selection. On this view, whatever promotes your reproduction is good, and this means anything entangled with it, like your survival, health, or the survival and health of your mate and children. This fails in a similar way to divine command theory. It doesn't actually tell us why we should care about what promotes the replication of our genes, and so fails to actually resolve the problem. You'll also note, for example, that rape is very effective as a reproductive strategy, proven by how much coerced sex is seen in the natural world. And few could imagine being convinced that rape is actually perfectly fine by being told that it promotes the replication of one's genes. Evolution doesn't tell us anything about any purpose. It's just a purely neutral matter of fact about what traits can continue to exist. The second fails in a way more similar to the argument about telos. Some say that the distinction is not real because once we've established a goal of some kind, we can make objective statements about good or bad relative to that goal, or rather what the objectively best method to achieve it is. A good example for this would be that if you define where you wish to go and where you are, there is an objectively faster or more energy efficient way to get there. While it's true that these answers are objective matters of fact about speed and resource usage, it fails because it still does not tell us on what basis we are picking our goals. It kicks the can down the road and does not explain how or why we have our goal, or any goal whatsoever, and doesn't even tell us why we care about how much time or energy something takes to accomplish. At the core of this problem, I think, is the fact that the is-ought or fact-value distinction speaks to a fundamental, logical distinction. Fundamentally, a value is something that motivates you. Or in other words, values are fundamentally about action or psychological change and motion, whether that manifests in your body by moving your muscles, or in your mind with thoughts and shifts of attention. By contrast, facts are, by their very nature, inert and provide no energy to anybody. And even if you disagree that this is about facts and values, you still have to contend with this idea of what motivates and what doesn't. Why? Because they are logical opposites. The problem with the views I have explained, and why the is-ought problem is a problem, is that when you try to define motion only in terms of stillness and inertia, all you are going to get is stillness and inertia. There is no equation made of zeros that produces a positive number. 1 cannot be defined in terms of 0, nor vice versa. Logically, you have to work out where the motive force comes from, or you are trying to conjure motion from stillness. The is-ought problem is one of the great philosophical problems that faces the modern world, and is one of the sources of the crisis of meaning we find ourselves in. Many of us hold to a worldview where we place truth and fact at the top and subjugate all else to it. We make stillness an absolute, and so logically, that is all we can get. Some make no attempt to justify values, taking them as not worth the thought. Others try to do so, but either assert them without explanation or are forced to face this contradiction. In either case, we end up with an ever-encroaching nihilism that creeps onward as the logical consequences of this view catch up with us. To save the world from the meaning crisis and the spectre of nihilism, we have no choice but to find the source of value and understand how it bears upon our actions and lives. I believe I have done so, but I'll have to explain that in another video. In the meantime, comment your thoughts down below, and if you enjoyed this video, support me by liking the video and subscribing to my channel.